All right, folks, hello there. My name is Chef Alexis. I'm going to get started in just a moment. I'm seeing participants come on in, so I'll give them just one more minute. But while you're getting started, you can check out the setup that I have here. We'll go through how you're going to be measuring your ingredients, and we'll go through the recipes together. But make sure you have your recipe and pull things from the fridge. All right, let's see. So let me just double check. Great. All right, we've got people still rolling in, but they can roll on in during the intro here. So I am representing the Baltimore Chef Shop today from my own home kitchen in Hamden. The Chef Shop was started in 2015 by a husband and wife team. They had envisioned having a culinary school that was really dedicated to the home cook. For about 10 years, it was a vision in the making. They opened up and actually expanded to now 3 different kitchens. Before coronavirus, when we were able to do in-person classes, we had techniques classes, really focused on knife skills and particular techniques, menu-based classes ranging from Creole cuisine to Moroccan cuisine to Indian, really regionally focused. But recently, we've added make-at-home kits. So some of you might have taken advantage of that, getting our Berger Cookie make-at-home kit. We have online interactive cooking classes via Zoom, as well as takeout dinners and pantry items. You will notice that I am sharing my screen right now, so I'm just going to give a little brief intro and then I'll exit and you'll be able to see me as the primary speaker. So just hold tight for a moment. Let me see, let me stop my share right here. So if it is your first time using Zoom, I just wanted to let you know that you can hover over me and hover to the right corner and you'll see 3 little dots. You can actually pin that video so that you can see me the whole time. I'm using 2 cameras today, so you can see my face. You can also see my hands as I work. So please do let me know if you have any questions about that. My name again is Chef Alexis, for those of you who just joined. I'm pretty new to Baltimore. My partner and I moved here in the fall. He's actually faculty at Hopkins, and we're really excited to be here. It's a great food community. I began my culinary career very early as a teenager, as a caterer, and it started a catering company when I was 16. I never really wanted to work in restaurants. I found a really happy home in culinary education. So I teach kids, I teach adults, I've taught a whole range of people. I was the director of a teaching kitchen in Boston for a number of years before moving here. So I want to share with you a little bit about the history of Berger cookies. So check it out. Berger cookies began with Henry Berger arriving in the US from Germany in 1835. He opened his bakery in East Baltimore. He had 3 sons who were all involved in the business. One of his sons was named George. When George retired, he decided to sell the bakery to a man named Charles E. Russell. Now, the Russell family employed 2 brothers, Charles and Benjamin de Beaufry. These brothers actually ended up, they were entrepreneurial. They ended up starting their own business called the Beaufry Bakeries. And they eventually, had enough cash in their bank account. They were successful. They purchased the Bergers from the Russell family in 1969. So currently it is the de Beaufry lineage who currently runs Berger Cookies. And he's still running, Charles DeBoffrey Jr. is still running the business. So it's an exciting history. Let me stop my screen share here for just a moment. So I'm hoping that you have the ingredients list in front of you, as well as some of the ingredients here. Now let's go through it. So first ingredient that we're gonna need is 1/3 cup of butter at room temperature. Now I have 1 stick of butter here that I've let sit out for a couple hours. It's really important in this recipe that we want it softened, not melted, but softened. So to measure 1/3 cup of butter, I'm gonna open this up, and 1/3 cup is about 2/3 of a stick. If you have a kitchen scale at home that you're comfortable using, that's 2.66 ounces. And we're gonna go, let's see, about 1/3, 2/3. I'm using 2/3, so the rest of that stick I'll put off to the side. Now, if your butter is hard, you didn't know that you needed room temperature butter until now, you can carefully put your stick of butter on a plate and put it in the microwave for about 10 seconds at a time. But within a couple seconds deviation, you can really melt it. So be careful, only put it in for about 10 seconds, check 10 seconds. The other ingredients that we need today are salt. So this was part of the meal kit that I got from the chef shop. So it comes pre-measured for you. So I need a half a teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract that's gonna be in the cookie dough. Well, I also have a half teaspoon for my, my gooey, fudgy frosting that we're gonna put on the top. I also need 1 teaspoon of baking powder. So this is pre-measured for you, for me, not pre-measured for you. You're gonna have to measure that yourself at home. And a half cup of sugar, which I have pre-measured here. I just wanted to pause for a moment to talk about how do you measure dry ingredients versus the wet ingredients that are coming next. You really wanna make sure that you're using the appropriate measuring cup. So for dry ingredients, this is the type of typical measuring cup that you would want to use. And the method here to really do this appropriately is to scoop until you've sort of filled it up. And you want some kind of flat device, a knife. This is a sort of spatula. And I want to make sure it's totally filled up. I'll use this one too to kind of fill it even overflowing. And then I want to use this straight edge to just run along the top. Now this is how I'm going to get a perfect, half cup measure. You'll notice that I didn't pack it on in there. We want these cookies to be really light and cake-like. And whenever you're reading a recipe for a baked good, it's intended to be this kind of light method of putting it in. In contrast, for liquids like our milk, we want to use a liquid measuring cup. Now, technically, if I was to fill this measuring cup up with a 1/3 cup of milk, it would be equivalent to this. However, most people who are trying to fill up a measuring cup, you stop shy because you don't want to make a mess all over the place. So it's a safer bet to use a volume measuring cup for your liquids. And you can measure that by just placing it flat on a surface and really looking at the line from the side, right? So when I'm measuring this, I want this to go right up at that line, all right? So to complete the ingredients that we need right now, we need 1/3 cup of butter, salt, vanilla extract, baking powder, half cup of sugar, 1 egg. Now this egg, I also let stay at room temperature for the last couple of hours. I'll talk about that in just a moment when we get into some cookie science. 1.5 cups of flour using that dry measure method, and then 1/3 cup of milk. I'm gonna pause for just a moment to see if there were any questions in the Q&A or in the chat function. I'm seeing someone asked about the history of Berger Cookie. Hopefully the intro I just gave helped share that. Now someone asked, is this the actual official Berger cookie recipe, I looked this up. They actually use margarine and some slight deviations to this recipe. So thanks for that question. I'll give you a moment to collect those ingredients, preheat your oven to 400 degrees. I'm going to talk to you just for a moment about cookie science. All right. So, you know, we're making cookies today, everyday cookies, right? But there's actually a lot of science to this. On the right, I have a little sort of chart of cookies that are undergoing the experimental method, right? You have your original cookie recipe, and each cookie has on top has a slightly different leavening agent, a different kind of chocolate, a different kind of flour, different age or temperature, sugar type, and fat type. These are some of the major variables we use when we're cooking cookies. For these Berger cookies, I have some done versions here that hopefully you can see. We're looking for a really cakey, sponge-like base with a fudgy topping that's about, you know, the equivalent in size. So we want it to be really soft. We're going to be using butter, both as a fat source to give it that nice kind of soft, silky mouthfeel, but also as a leavening agent, which might be surprising to some of you. It becomes a leavening agent when we cream it with sugar. So as we are mixing it, blending it together with our sugar, little air pockets are created. This is sort of the magic of butter, but this is also why we don't want to use frigid butter. We want it to be room temperature, okay? Another major variable in cookies is the kind of leavening agent that you use. So today we are using baking powder as opposed to baking soda or some other kind of chemical reaction. And we're using this because we want rise. We want the sort of the puffiness of cake in cookie form. And baking powder also results in a lighter color. So we want a nice light cookie. We're not looking for a dark brown here. In contrast, if you were to use baking soda, that actually results in more spread when you're cooking. It doesn't sort of hold its shape as well. And it also results in more browning. It changes the pH of the cookie dough that you're making. So you actually get a different color to it. And one of the other factors that's important to keep in mind is temperature in this recipe. So temperature affects the speed of the spread of your cookie. So colder fat tends to result in a slower spread. So for today, you know, we want minimal spread. We're going to sort of flatten these out. I'll show you in a moment. But we have so much leavener in there and so much nice sort of the butter and sugar mixture will give us a really nice rise. Okay, so let's see. So let's get back to our recipe here. So we have the oven on at 400 degrees. You want to make sure that you have appropriate baking sheets for today. So my preferred method is using a Silpat. This is a really great investment for you to make if you don't have one already in your kitchen. I've had this since I was 13. I've had this for a lot of years, about 20 years. So these are a great investment to have, and you just want to make sure you have two baking sheets, either with a Silpat or lined with parchment paper. If you don't have either of those, you can use some canola oil, something to spray down your baking sheet. The third step in our procedure is to, in a bowl of an electric mixer fitted with a paddle attachment, cream together the butter, salt, vanilla, and baking powder. You can also use a handheld device if that's something that you have at your disposal. So I am going to take some of those ingredients over to prepare that process. And I'm also going to move my camera over. So give me a moment. Great, so you can get a bird's eye view in there. So I need my butter. I need my salt. my vanilla, which I'm just using half of here since I have 2 teaspoons measured in the take-home kit. And let's see, and my baking powder, of course. Now this recipe is a bit strange, I have to say. Most doughs or most batters, you want to mix up all of your dry ingredients, and then you mix up all of your wet ingredients, and then you mix those together. That is most recipes out there. This one is quite different, right? As we'll see. We're gonna just start by creaming the butter with our salt, vanilla, half of that, and our baking powder. Very unusual. All right, I'm gonna close this up and turn this on. I want it, my butter is really nice and soft. I want this to be, I want it to kind of fall off the mixer right here of the attachment, and I really want it creamed, so it should be really nice and mixed. So I'm gonna keep an eye on that in my video here. Next up is gonna be my sugar and the egg. So I have my sugar already measured here, my half cup of sugar. I still need to crack my egg. So most folks who we see in the chef shop do right off the bat go ahead and crack their egg on the rim of a bowl. At the chef shop, we actually like to teach folks to use a flat surface. Now, why do you think this could be? Well, you've probably experienced this before, where you crack, and eggshell gets lodged right into your egg. Perhaps you haven't washed your egg and we're concerned about some kind of bacteria or sort of entering into the egg. But we also tend to force shell into the egg, which then cracks our egg yolk. And there's so many different things you can do in the kitchen, separating your egg yolks from your egg whites, you know, frying an egg where you actually want the egg yolk to be together. So you want to kind of get in the practice of keeping them whole. An egg is probably my favorite ingredient there is in the kitchen. The albumin is mostly protein, and the egg yolk is mostly fat, right? It's cholesterol, unfortunately, but it also has amazing properties, like being an emulsifier. So I'm going to go ahead to this next step to add in my sugar. Half cup of sugar here. Hopefully you can see my butter. It's just visually, it looks nice and creamed, like slightly fluffed, which is good. It's nice and light and sort of malleable here. I'm gonna turn this back on just for a moment to let my sugar incorporate for a moment first before I add in my egg. There's no real need to mix up my egg before adding it in. The mixer will do that job for us. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and dump this egg on in. Great. You'll notice that I'm not going at a super high speed, but I am gonna make sure that I have a scraping device, so a spatula here, so that I can scrape down the sides. Unless you're using a handheld mixer, oftentimes you get irregularities in how quickly things are mixing, right? So let me just see here. So add in the sugar and the egg and blend to incorporate. Let me take a look here. We are getting there. You might notice at home in this stage that if your egg was super cold when you added it to your butter, that they're not incorporating quite as easily. Here I'm seeing, you know, they're mixing quite well, so I'm getting a really nice homogeneous mixture. I want kind of a uniform color here, and I don't want to see big globules of egg or of butter. I'm gonna let that go. I'm just gonna check in to see if there were any other questions in the Q&A. Feel free to put other questions there. Great. Okay. And let's see, so I'm seeing one note that it's going too fast for those who are starting from scratch. So I am gonna pause and slow down a little bit here. But to get this done in 1 hour, I need to keep a little bit of a pace. So I apologize for that. Let me see here. I see another question about unsalted or salted butter. So when we're baking, we usually want to opt for unsalted butter so that we do have a bit more control over the salt level. Salt here functions both as a flavorant, right? Salt helps make a steak taste steakier, or a tomato taste tomatoier, or sweets. It really helps to balance out flavor and just add new dimensions to it. If you think about salted caramel, right? It's a heavenly mix. But we definitely want to use unsalted butter here to start. And we added in a half teaspoon of salt to add in that saltiness. Let me see here. So let me check out our mix. You can see I've got this really nice creamy texture to it. This is exactly what I want to see. I'm seeing a little bit of the dough sort of stuck on the dough hook, so, or on the paddle attachment here. So I'm going to go ahead and just scrape that down a little bit and just give it one more go, one more mix here. Great. All right. So that is that for now. Great. Next up in our recipe, with the mixer on low, alternately add the flour and milk, beginning and ending with the flour. Mix until just blended. So I mentioned to you guys how this is a really strange recipe as far as baked goods go. We did not mix our dry ingredients and then our wet ingredients separately. These are being added at really purposeful stages here. And the primary reason for those stages is to keep this sort of lightness of the butter and to get some more air in it. So at this stage, we're gonna be adding in our milk. It's just a little bit of milk, 1/3 of a cup, and then our 1.5 cups of flour. So another reason why we're sort of alternating between one and the other is to let the flour be absorbed into both the liquid of our egg and the liquid of our milk. So I'm just seeing another question here. When should you use the paddle versus the whisk attachment? So if you were to move into this next step with the whisk attachment, you would notice it's like clunky and slow. It's pretty tough, which is why we're using this paddle attachment. Generally, when you are trying to fold in a lot of air and, for meringue, souffles, for whipping of eggs and a more egg-based batter, you definitely want to opt for the whisk attachment. Hope that answered your question. So I'm going to go ahead and bring my flour and my milk over here. You'll notice that it says beginning and ending with the flour. So I'm going to turn this on once I've added my flour in so that I don't end up covered with flour like a ghost. So I put in about a 1/2 cup to start. I'm going to that tops off the 1/2 cup. I'm going to turn this on. Great. All right, so this is where you certainly want to have a spatula or a spoon or something to really scrape down the sides. You can see the flour likes to coat the outside. So I'll just move this up for a moment. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Great. Now I'm going to add about 1/3 to 1/2 of my milk. And I'm going to mix. So you can imagine with this low hydration point of this dough, right? There's only a little bit of liquid that if we were to add one at one time, it would really clump together. So in the effort to have a really even mix and one where the flour has time to absorb in the liquid, we're going slow here. All right, so this is sort of our middle step here where I'm going to add in another big scoop of flour. I'll just remind folks, if you missed the step, make sure your oven is on. I can feel that mine is preheated. It's very hot. Great. All right, so we'll give that some time to mix in. Then we're gonna add in the rest of our milk and the rest of our flour. I'm just gonna look ahead for the next steps in our recipe here. So the next step is going to be actually forming our cookies and putting them in the oven. They only take about 10 minutes to cook. So I'm just clearing off space in front here so that you can see me go through that process. All right, so that is incorporated. I'm gonna add in more of my milk here, the last of my milk here. Great. Great. And the last of the flour in, which should be about a half cup. Okay. So I'm gonna let that go. I'm just gonna check in again to see if there are any questions in the Q&A or in the chat. I'm not seeing anything for the moment. All right, so just to let you know, so the sheet tray that I've prepared, again, it's just silpat or parchment paper or spray. I'm gonna turn this off. I'm gonna take out my paddle attachment here. Okay, I'm gonna take this on over here. And let me bring my camera, give me a moment. All right, so hopefully your dough is looking close to this. I'm gonna scrape off the sides here and answer this question I see just came in. Possible to use gluten-free flour or an egg substitute? Generally, when you are baking or cooking, right, the protein content of different flours differs. So you would want to look up a particular recipe. I'm sorry, I didn't look that up in advance to see the substitutions. I'm not sure, but you can try that out at home and let us know what the texture ends up like. I did notice some alternatives for sort of healthier substitutions. An egg substitute generally should be fine. That converts easily depending on the egg substitute you're using. Great. All right, so paddle attachment goes to the side, and I'm just going to make sure that this recipe is mixed up. There isn't a lot of flour on the sides. Great. All right, so it looks really nice and even. I'm going to just poke it with my pinky here. It should be really sticky. So this is a feature of this dough, that it is very sticky. And if you check out the next couple of steps here, it says drop tablespoon size drops of dough onto the prepared baking sheets, spacing about 3 inches apart. Using the tips of your fingers, lightly tap the top of each cookie to flatten it to about 1.5 inches. Now, how do you touch a very sticky dough with your fingers? There are a couple options. One is to have a tiny glass of water by your side, or to use some oil. My preferred is oil. You want to make sure that you're using a neutral oil like canola. So this is not in your recipe, but through trialing this recipe, I realized this was the best method. So for my little assembly line here, I'm going to make sure that I have a plate with just a little bit of canola oil on the base, so that I can either use my fingers to kind of de-stick, or to use actually the bottom of a glass, which I'll show you in just a moment. for our assembly line here, let me make sure you're set up to see okay. I have my landing place, I have my dough, and to scoop, you can either use a 1 table ice cream scoop if you have one of those that, I have one, but it's a little too big for today. But if you have one of these, you can definitely use that. The alternative method is to use some spoons. So these don't need to be perfectly a tablespoon, but these are smaller than, this recipe calls for slightly smaller cookies than I've seen before. Okay, so you're gonna get about a tablespoon on your spoon and then just use the other spoon to scrape it off. Okay, it's okay if they're sort of mounded here, a little bit oddly shaped. We'll reshape them when we're squishing them out. But you want to make sure that you do have 3 inches between them, right? We do have all of that chemical leavener in there and all of that whipped butter and sugar. So these should expand a bit. There's a little bit of egg in there. These should expand a bit in the oven. You will probably come close to filling out 2 full baking sheets. So I'm doing 4 in this direction in this row, and then I'll do 3 in the columns. Okay. Great, and just checking to see if there were any other questions coming in. Hopefully while I'm doing this, it gives you a little bit of time to play catch up if you were behind a step or two. So the history of Berger cookies is quite interesting. There's a sort of sister cookie, black and white cookie, which was, that came out of New York City. So I was trying to read more about, you know, if these, if both bakers were from a similar part of Europe or if they ever met, or, you know, it's always interesting to see how these cultural traditions, these food traditions shift and shape as people move, migrate, immigrate. So now I'm just about done with one of these pans. Still have a good amount of dough left, which is just fine. And let me show, let's get back to this oil. Why did I put that oil out? So if we were to just throw these right on in the oven, they would be massively tall. And there wouldn't be much surface area for our fudgy frosting. So to make a better platform for frosting, Berger cookies need to be flattened out a bit. So again, I can use my little bit of oil, my very neutral oil. You can use canola, some vegetable oil. You don't want to use olive oil. That would really change the flavor. And I can just dab my fingers in them and just press down until they're a little bit flatter, till they're about 1.5 inches apart. Another approach is the glass method. So you want to use a glass that actually has a really flat bottom to it. If it's concave or convex, it will kind of create a suction cup and doesn't work quite as well. So if it's really nice and flat, I'll let a little bit of that excess oil come on off, and I can use this to just push on down. So I feel like a sloth in the kitchen here, going so slowly after watching videos of the actual factory. They go at such an incredible speed going through making these and dipping them. But we're going at our pace today. All right, so I liked the hand method a little bit better. It's a little bit easier for me. So do whichever works for you. All right, and I'm gonna just, I'll round out the edges just a little bit. When we're cooking at home, right, it can be rustic. You can always just give it the title rustic if our round cookies are square or oblong. So you'll wanna finish this with your second tray. I'm gonna do this mix up here. I'll just get a couple more out on here. You guys feel free to take your time to get all your dough done. I still have about half of it. So I'm gonna do just a couple more cookies here and get them in the oven so we can show you the frosting methodology. So I'm gonna do just a couple in the middle here. Now let's see, does anyone have questions? I'm seeing in the Q&A a couple more, but I think that I answered all of those. Let me see. Yeah, so can you quickly define a neutral oil? So one that doesn't have a really strong flavor to it. So again, canola oil is a great one, vegetable oil. You don't want to use something that is intensely fruity or just intensely flavorful. Definitely don't accidentally put some like garlic oil or flavored oil in. Let's see. I'm seeing someone said they only got 1 page of the recipe. What about getting the copy of instructions? Our recipes do come with in the procedure following it. So I'm happy to pass this off to folks if they had issues with it, okay? Sorry about that if you didn't get it in advance. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and put these in the oven so we have time to work on the frosting. Let me just see if anyone else had questions coming in. Okay, should kosher salt be used for cookies? A lot of recipes will define what kind of salt to use. This recipe, we did use kosher salt in rather than a sea salt. It's a sort of marginal amount, right? There's some cookies that will be really specific if you are using flaked salt on top or something where you really want a nice structure to that crystal, like a larger surface area to it. Your taste bud really registers it as a sort of chunk of salt, which can be a nice touch. Let's see, other questions. Okay, if you could pass along the recipe, that would be helpful. Only got the ingredient list. Okay, so we'll definitely pass that along, make sure you have that. I'm gonna just move for a moment to set a timer for my cookies. So these only go in for 10 to 11 minutes. Again, I mentioned that we do not want a lot of browning on these. We really don't want them to dry out. The like frosting going into that nice soft chewy cookie is what we're looking for. So bake for 10 to 11 minutes until the bottom of the cookies are just beginning to brown. Meanwhile, we're gonna get to what's step 9, heating a pot with about 4 inches of water in it until the water boils. We are essentially setting up a double boiler, which is a great method to know if it is not yet in your repertoire. A double boiler is a great way to kind of gently melt chocolate. So if you are tempering chocolate, if you are making chocolate dipped strawberries or a ganache or numerous kinds of chocolate based desserts, you don't want to put your chocolate chips or your chocolate chunks directly into a saucepan. Chocolate does not melt that evenly in that kind of a surface. We want it to melt really gently and really slowly. So we can set up a double boiler. Now I have a couple inches of water here in a pan, and I'm making sure that the bowl that's gonna sit in this pan sits right on the rim. It doesn't fall in. And that the bottom of the pan does not sit in water. I don't want it submerged in water. So I have here 2 cups of chocolate chips. I'm also going to add to this some corn syrup. So I have 1.5 tablespoons of corn syrup to add, the rest of my vanilla and cream. So let me go ahead and measure that out. And we should have a good amount of, just enough time before the cookies are done. Okay, great. So I can reuse this container I used to measure my milk. Again, we want to use a proper measuring tool for liquids. So I'll put this down in front of me. I'll show you where I'm working. And I have heavy cream here. So I'm looking at the 3/4 mark here. When I measure, I really want to get down, if I can, to eye level to make sure that I'm going all the way to the line, and maybe even just a tiny bit past it. Okay, so 3/4 cups of heavy cream. So to this, I'm also going to add in my corn syrup, which can be a little bit tricky to get out. Get a spoon for a moment, or a fork. So chocolate chips, corn syrup will go on in. And this frosting, you know, the goal for this frosting is that it's really thick and spreadable, that when it cools down to room temperature, it doesn't harden, but it's no longer like dripping, right? So we also really want it to be glossy. We want it to have that sheen. So we are adding corn syrup to kind of assist with that end goal in mind. So I'm going to add the chocolate chips, corn syrup, my vanilla, and my cream. Now, some of you might be thinking, ooh, I cannot set up a double boiler right now, or I don't have a good bowl for this. You can do this in a glass bowl in the microwave. That is an option. Just be certain that you are not burning it. So again, you want to start with smaller increments to start the heating process. All right. So I have here my cream and chocolate mixture. I'm checking over here. The water doesn't need to be at a full boil, right? We just want some heat passing through it. So even though it's not at a full boil right now, it has been heating already. You know, I usually want it to be at a boil so that I have steam. So it's not just sitting there forever, but it's okay. It's a gentle way to heat this. All right, let me just see if other questions that are coming up. So question about flour, sifted or unsifted. This recipe actually doesn't call for it to be sifted. It has sort of it doesn't seem to be a problem in this recipe like it does in other ones, like in our crepe batter, for example. We always sift, right? So that we don't have big clumps. The temperature to bake is 400 degrees. So they only take about 10 minutes, 10 to 11 minutes to cook, but at a high temperature. Great. This question about, should trays be limited to the same oven rack, or is it okay to have trays on multiple racks? As long as they're not overlapping, that should be okay. My oven, I wanted the racks to be towards the middle of the oven. Some ovens have real hot spots where at the top or at the bottom, it's significantly hotter or cooler. So the oven should be a little easier. Ooh, interesting question from Joy Allen. Can you make the dough ahead and freeze it before baking? Again, we talked at the very beginning about how important temperature is in the baking process. So you might end up with a slightly different consistency, but my hunch is that it should be okay to freeze before, as long as you're forming the balls beforehand and letting them, you can let them sort of thaw out in the refrigerator a little bit so that you can actually squish them down. Let's see, so the confectioner's sugar, good question. This is our remaining ingredient. We are not adding that in yet. So the first step is to melt our chocolate and our, just until it starts to melt, so you can see that it's really shiny in here with our cream. The last step in this frosting is actually to add in the confectioner's sugar. So tool-wise, right, we have our chocolate that is pretty close to melted. I can see again, visually, it looks really different in color and texture. I want to use a whisk at this stage to help mix everything up. I could also try with a spatula, but you're trying to mix a sort of semi-solid with a liquid right now, and the whisk really gets the job done much better. Okay, so I'm gonna just head over here for a second. I need a hot pad or a towel or something to hold on the edge to secure it. And I'm just gonna do a little test to see if I've melted yet. I could still use some more time. It's just starting to break up, but I'm gonna turn this heat back on. The color deceived me. So we'll give it a little bit more time. In the microwave, you could do, 20-second increments, 20 seconds in, take it out, give it a mix. Don't put your metal bowl in the oven, or in the microwave rather. All right, so we'll give that a little bit more time. I'm gonna just take a little peek here at my cookies. I'm getting nice puff to them. I'm already seeing a little bit of browning around the edges. So I'm gonna make sure I keep my eye on those. And let me just move this a little closer so you can see right in there. All right. Great. So then I see this question about advice for an electric oven rather than gas oven. My electric oven seems to brown baked goods too early. The amount of variety even in gas ovens is quite amazing. So I think it's just good to know where your hot spots are in your oven. You can get a thermometer for your oven and actually just test it, different corners, different levels of it. So, if you turn your oven to 400, is one part of it at 390, the other is at 405, to get a sense. Let's see, what type of chocolate chips or melting chocolate do you recommend? So for these, we just have, I believe, bittersweet or semi-sweet chocolate chips. I am a big fan of dark chocolate, but this recipe is not really for dark chocolate lovers. It's a bit on the sweeter side, but you can really try it out with lots of different kinds of chocolate. This one is easy in the chocolate chips most people have in their pantry, though during coronavirus, I shouldn't say most people. It's hard to get flour these days. So let me go ahead and give this a try here, mixing it up with our whisk again. All right, we're starting to get there. You can see it's really nice and melted on the side. Once your bowl sort of comes up to heat, you don't have to work over the stovetop like this. But if it's not there yet, I'm gonna leave it on there. Oh, we're just starting to get there, okay. So while that is going, I'm gonna use this plate over here for this dirty whisk. I can see that my timer is just about to go off. So let me go ahead and check these. Aha. So I'll bring these over to show. So I'm seeing just a little bit of browning around the edges. That's perfect. Don't wait for there to be too much color on them. They will just kind of get tough, which is not what we're looking for here. So that's it. That's very quick timing for our cookies here. I'll take my second batch out. And we're gonna let these cool for 5 minutes on the baking sheet to let them harden up. If we tried to move these right now, we would notice that they tear apart. They just kind of fall apart. So we'll let them cool. Let's see. Let me move this on over along with my camera here. My camera's getting a steam bath, whoops. All right. So this is hot. I'm gonna grab the edge here, grab my whisk back, and really give this a nice mix. For those of you who maybe didn't listen to my advice and started with a spatula, you'll notice how it's hard to get these to incorporate right now. Whereas with the whisk, they're just sort of melting together. All right, let me see what other questions we have while I'm working here. We don't want that heavy cream to boil, right? So we want this to actually cool down for us pretty quickly. So we don't want the heavy cream really boiling. I apologize if mine was while I was speaking. We just want it warm. So if you're doing it in the microwave, just, if you put your finger in it and it's kind of lukewarm, starting to get warmer, that's fine. Chocolate will definitely melt before it hits the cream's boiling point. All right, So you can see partially because, you know, we did this low and slow, we have this nice color and texture and sort of silkiness to this, but also that corn syrup is really helping us along in that regard. So once these are completely mixed, I'm just gonna test kind of pulling it up to see if I have any lumps. If I do, I'm gonna give it a little bit more of a stir. And I'll mention, I just said leave the cookies on your sheets for 5 minutes, but where do they go next? A cooling rack if you have it, just because we want the temperature of our cookies to drop so that we can dunk them, both without hurting our hands and so that the cookies just have a little more structural integrity to them. So we'll keep an eye on those for 5 minutes and set up our cooling rack. Okay. Okay, great. So what is the next step here? So once your chocolate is melted, stir the mixture until smooth, then add in the confectioner's sugar and stir it until completely blended. So I have here 1.5 cups of confectioner's sugar. If you have a sieve, a sifter at home, I would suggest using it. The recipe doesn't call for it, but as you notice, when I do this with unsifted confectioner's sugar, it tends to clump up. And I'm gonna use the whisk here. If it really clogs, I can switch to a spatula, a rubber spatula. But what is confectioner's sugar, right? It's a powdered sugar, but there's also a little bit of cornstarch, a little bit of a kind of thickener in it, which is why it's oftentimes used for frosting. Many frosting recipes are just powdered sugar with some kind of liquid. In this case, our liquid is chocolate. Okay, and I'm gonna I'm holding on one side. You'll notice how I'm kind of holding the whisk like with a really firm grasp with the outside of my hand so that I can really scrape around the edges. And I'm mixing, mixing, mixing. If your temperature isn't quite hot enough in your kind of cream and chocolate mixture, you can always just throw it back onto the double boiler. That's still hot. It's like a steam room in here. So you can always throw it back on there or throw it in the microwave for just a little bit if it's cooling too quickly. Okay, I'm working out my arm here. So there are some bigger lumps I'm seeing, as I mentioned, or sort of foreshadowed. It's okay, it'll taste good. But if you have a sifter, you'll get a little bit more even. Okay, so I'm gonna put those to the side for a moment and get back to these cookies. It's been about 5 minutes. I'll put this on the side in the back here. Let's bring these cookies forward. And now to get these off, if it hasn't been quite enough time, they'll probably give me some resistance. That's true for lots of things that you're cooking. If you're searing a steak, you're searing something and it's giving you a lot of resistance, it's not ready. All right, so let me just check this out. Oh, it really popped off. You know, I'm not getting a lot of sticking. It has a nice solid base to it. I think I probably left these in 1 minute too long. I'm a little bit darker in color than I wanted, but that's okay. So again, this bottom side is what we're gonna actually be frosting. I'm just flipping these over. You can either just flip them over to let them cool a little bit, or if you do have a cooling rack, you can toss them over onto the cooling rack, which I'm gonna do so that I have a setup to show you guys how to frost them. So I'll just show you. Again, this is one of these great investments that, you know, you'll make. If you buy a good one, you'll keep it for a long time, and they have so many different uses. It's really worthwhile. Okay, let's see. Great. Okay, Let me just check this out. So our chocolate was melted. We stirred the mixture until smooth. We added the confectioner's sugar, blended completely. Allow the icing to cool to room temperature. Now this is the tricky part, waiting. Then dip the bottom of the cooled cookies into the icing and place icing side up on baking sheets. So this, I'll show you in just a second. I'm just double checking that no one has a burning question right now. Okay. So I just saw one person asked, is it better to heat the icing on the stove or in the microwave? It doesn't really matter. It depends on what your preference is, but I think I'm up on your questions. All right, so here we go. We have this frosting here. I'm gonna remove the whisk. This is no longer a useful tool for us. Some lucky member of your family can lick that off. All right, and for dipping these, right? These are cool enough to touch. If you have a little bit more time on your hands to wait, that's okay, or that's preferable. The frosting, we want a little bit cooler than this, but we'll go with it. So you should check out a video online. If you look up Berger Cookies to see the actual employees there working, they work a mile a minute. They get these done so quickly. We're gonna go slow and steady here though, as we're learning. So I'm dunking the bottom side in, that darker side in, and I simply pull up and try to not make a giant mess and put that down face up to kind of cool. And this will stiffen up as it does cool. Dunk. Let me make sure you can see. So dunk, pull on up. This is the sort of the problem or the warning with it being warmer. You can see how it falls off easier than we want it to. So if you had some that were, you had a little bit more time to let your frosting harden up, your life would be a bit easier. You can see as I'm working these, you know, this is the sort of width, the height rather, of my cookie. I want the frosting to be piled on there about an equivalent amount. So your recipe will say on it to, after all the cookies have been dipped, dollop the remaining icing on top of the iced cookies and evenly spread using a small knife. So that's the way we're going to finish these off to make sure they have the right ratio. Great. And I have to say this, you know, we used about a tablespoon of dough here for each cookie. I think it's a good sized cookie. It's not an overwhelming amount, but they're not miniature, certainly. All right. I wish that I could see all your faces and see what you're working on at home. When I'm not teaching at the chef shop, I work in K through 12 education and I teach kids remotely these days, but we do a lot of science and cooking classes. So it's always fun to see, you know, and know that they have the same smells going on in their kitchen. It's a whole lot of fun. So I hope that we get to see your pictures of what you're doing at home. Hopefully you can send them to the Alumni Association. So I'm going to do just these last couple ones here. See if any of your other questions are coming in. I'll do one more and then I'll just show you how you can use a knife or a spatula to finish these off. So I'll rinse my fingers off. Great, and if you have a small offset spatula or a spatula like this, both can certainly be useful here. The offset spatula might be a little bit easier. But what you can do is just take your cookie, put a nice dollop on top, and just kind of spread it around so it has a nice place to land. And then that will cool and harden up and you'll get the right ratio. Okay, so I'll do one more here just to demonstrate. So a nice dollop. Push that right on top. Give it a nice swirl, and then that will harden off. I'm gonna see if there were any last questions here. I heard the bulb of a whisk was to be half the width of the bowl. Is that technically true? I'm not exactly sure what that question means. I'm not sure if you can clarify for me, but we still have a minute left. Does the Chef Shop hire college interns? I would certainly email the Chef Shop. Their information can be found online. At the moment, it's a hard question to answer. At other times, I believe that they would. So hopefully, we go back to in-person classes soon. How can we find the recording for later playback? I'm gonna ask the co-facilitators from Hopkins to see if you have that answer for people. Let me see, can my son contact you sometime after to discuss the possible internship? Oh, fantastic. Yeah, let me, the website, BaltimoreChefShop.com, is in the header there. Gwen at the Chef Shop is one of the co-owners. She would be someone to help there. Let's see, someone said, my icing is not thickening, so it's probably too hot. I would not add more corn syrup to help it thicken. That's just a matter of the temperature, right? The viscosity is higher when the temperature is higher. And thank you for the great job comment. I really hope that you had fun. These are delicious cookies. We've been eating them as I've been practicing since I'm not a Baltimore native. But I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and please do check out the Chef Shop. Our online classes are really fun. We have sushi. I taught a crepes class recently. We have a Mexican class in an hour. You can find those online. But please don't be a stranger and enjoy the weekend. All right, everyone. Bye-bye.